idea, so then we all can remember, is to hand out a piece of paper, always show your work, and tape it to the front of your binder. So whenever
You'd have to look at the front of your binder to say.
So whenever you open your binder to put a lesson in, you always remember to show your work. That would help me. That's just work. That'll make me annoyed. Or you could just grab paper. I already know something.
Alright, if you'd write this down, please, today we're looking at what's called the greatest common factor, and rather than writing all that out, a lot of times the book will abbreviate it as GCF, greatest common factor. And this is just a putting together of a bunch of things that we did. Let me give you an example, and I think you'll figure out what it is here. Here's an example. Find the greatest common factor of 8 and 20. And in order to do this, step number 1 is you need to list all factors of both numbers. List all factors of both. So it looks like this, and you hopefully can do this. Factors of 8 equal 1 and 8 and 2 and 4. Factors of 20 would be 1 and 20, 2 and 10, 4 and 5. Those are all factors. Step number 2 is look for factors they have in common. So if you look at the factors they have in common, they both have a 1 as a common factor, they both have a 2, and they both have a 4. But in this case here, we are looking for the greatest common factor, which means step 3 is you want the biggest one, which in this case would be the number 4. The greatest common factor of 8 and 20 is the number 4. It's not a tough thing, but sometimes it takes a little while to figure those out. One more, and then we'll talk about why you need to know that. How about the greatest common factor of 115? 115. What are the factors of 15? Factors of 15, Tyler, are
1,
15,
15, 3, and 5.
1, 15, 3, and 5. Factors of 100, there are a few of them. 1 times 100, 2 times 50, 4 times 25, 5 times 20, and 10 times 10. Which ones do they have in common? Well, they have 1 in common, and they have 5 in common. Which is the biggest? 5. Now, why is that important to know? Well, especially with reducing fractions. If I have the fraction 15 over 100, you always want to reduce it by the greatest common factor of those two numbers. Okay, which in this case doesn't matter because it's really the only common factor. But if you reduce it by the greatest common factor, divide them both out, you end up with 3 over 20. If you always do it by the greatest common factor, you will always get the fraction in its lowest terms. Now let me go back to the one we did over here. See, if I had 8 and 20 as my fraction, if I have 8 and 20 as my fraction, and I don't use the greatest common factor, but use 2 because 2 does work, if I divide them both by 2, I end up with 4/10. But that would still be wrong because 4/10 can be reduced even more. 2 would go into it again and you get 2/5. If you do it right away by the greatest common factor, if I would take 8 over 20 and divide it by 4 right away, then I'm going to get my lowest term fraction right off the bat. So you always want to try to reduce by what we call the greatest common factor, or the biggest number that goes into both of them. Another example would be 6/12. If I have the fraction 6/12, what is the greatest common factor of 6 and 12? And you don't always have to sit down and write down all the factors, because hopefully you can kind of figure that out in your head. The biggest common factor is, Bryce? Unfortunately, that is incorrect. And that's where you have to be very careful, because a bigger number, Bryce, is, right, you want to divide it by 6. That's the greatest common factor, which gives you 1/2. If you would have done 3, which would have worked, unfortunately, you would still get the problem wrong because you end up with 2/4, and that would not still be reduced all the way. And again, you can look at it at this point and go, is there a number that goes into 2 and 4, and you divide them both by 2 again, and end up with 1/2, but you want to try to do it by the greatest common factor right away, just to save yourself some time.
What is the number on top of the 2?
It's a 1 that just didn't work very well. So, and there.